The evening was heavy with an almost palpable silence as Ramesh sat in his worn leather chair, the faint glow of the lamp beside him casting long shadows on the walls of his dimly lit living room. It had been a long day, filled with contemplation and frustration, but this particular evening was different. The weight of everything that had transpired in recent weeks seemed to press down on him harder tonight. His mind wandered back to the phone call, the one he couldn't quite shake off. His daughter-in-law, Mira, had always been a calculating woman, but this was something different. This was far beyond her usual scheming. She had taken it too far this time, and Ramesh knew it. But he wasn't the kind of man who would simply sit back and let her weave her web without a response. No, not now. Not after everything he had worked for, everything his family had endured. It wasn't just the conspiracy against him that bothered him. It was the betrayal that stung the most. His son, Vikram, had always been so loyal, so trusting. But now, Mira had him under her thumb, manipulating him in ways Ramesh never thought possible. She had planted seeds of doubt, whispering lies about his intentions, twisting his actions until his son saw him as the enemy. But Ramesh knew he couldn't back down. Not now. Not after everything that had been taken from him. He glanced at the family photos on the mantle, memories of a time when things were simpler. His son and his wife, Neelam, smiling at their wedding. Then, pictures of his grandchildren, their faces full of innocence and joy. The images seemed like relics of another life, another time when family meant something. A time when he wasn't looking over his shoulder, wondering who was scheming against him. But the conspiracy had begun with a small whisper, a planted thought that Mira had sown into his son's mind. She had made him believe that Ramesh was overstepping, that he was no longer capable of making sound decisions. She had convinced Vikram that his father's presence was a burden, that his opinions were outdated, irrelevant. Ramesh had never felt more alone in his life. His own son, his own flesh and blood, was questioning his worth. The betrayal cut deep, but Ramesh had lived a long life, and he had seen his fair share of deception. He was no stranger to adversity, and this was a challenge he wouldn't shy away from. If there was one thing he had learned in his years, it was that family could be both a source of strength and a weapon of destruction. And right now, his family was doing just that, destroying him from the inside out. But he refused to go down without a fight. This was his home, his life, and he wasn't about to let Mira tear it apart with her lies. It wasn't just about protecting himself anymore. It was about preserving the honor and dignity of his family, even if it meant facing the ones he loved the most. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking his reverie. It was a message from Vikram. Ramesh picked it up, his fingers trembling slightly. The message was short, just a few words. "We need to talk." "It's about Mira." Ramesh's heart sank. He had been expecting this. The confrontation was inevitable. Mira had pushed too far, and now it was time for Vikram to face the truth. But the question was, would he listen? Would he believe his father, or had Mira's manipulation gone too deep? Ramesh stood up from his chair, his bones creaking in protest. He had lived through countless hardships, but this was different. This wasn't just about his own survival. This was about saving his family from the destructive force that Mira had become. He couldn't allow her to tear them apart any longer. Taking a deep breath, Ramesh walked to the window and stared out into the dark night. The streetlights flickered in the distance, casting a cold glow on the empty road. He thought about his wife, Neelam, who had passed away a few years ago. She had always been the glue that held the family together, but now she was gone, leaving him to fight this battle alone. He missed her more than he could ever express. He glanced at the clock. It was already late, but he knew he couldn't wait any longer. The time had come to confront Mira and expose her for who she truly was. The conspiracy she had orchestrated would come to light, and he would make sure that she paid for what she had done to his family. As he picked up the phone to call Vikram, Ramesh's mind raced with thoughts of the past. He had worked his entire life to provide for his family, to build a legacy that they could be proud of. And now, in the twilight of his years, he was faced with the possibility of losing it all. But Ramesh wasn't going to let that happen. He had fought too hard, lived too long, and loved too deeply to let a conspiracy destroy everything he had built. He pressed the dial button, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The moment of truth had arrived. He was ready. Ready to confront the lies, ready to face the consequences, ready to fight for his family, no matter what. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity. Ramesh's grip tightened on the receiver as the line buzzed, each ring pushing his nerves to the breaking point. The moment he had been dreading was finally here, but a part of him still wished he could turn back, take the easier route, avoid the confrontation. But there was no turning back now. He had already made up his mind. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. He wasn't going to let his family crumble just because Meera had concocted a web of lies to get her way. If Vikram chose to side with her, so be it. But Ramesh couldn't sit idly by while everything he had worked for was torn apart by someone who didn't understand the value of family, sacrifice, and loyalty. "Hello." Vikram's voice crackled through the line, distant, distracted. Ramesh could tell he was somewhere in the middle of a hectic workday, just as Meera had planned. She had timed everything perfectly, making sure her husband was always too busy to deal with the family matters she had quietly orchestrated behind the scenes. "Vikram," Ramesh said, his voice steady but laced with a tone that demanded attention. "It's time we talked. About Meera." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a hesitation that Ramesh could almost feel. Vikram, despite all his success and ambition, had always been his son, and Ramesh could still hear the boy he had raised in his voice. He wasn't a hardened businessman or a manipulative partner yet. But the cracks were starting to show, and Ramesh wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on to the hope that his son would come to his senses. "Dad, I don't think this is the right time," Vikram replied, his voice tight. "Meera's been working non-stop, and I just don't have the energy for this right now. You have to understand, everything is complicated." Ramesh's jaw clenched. He had heard these excuses too many times over the past weeks. First, it was work. Then, it was her health. And now, it was complicated. How many times could he let Meera twist the truth, making everything difficult for Vikram to face? "No," Ramesh said, cutting through the weak excuses with a sharp edge. "It's not complicated. What's complicated is the truth you refuse to see. Meera has been manipulating you. She's playing you like a pawn in her little game, and you're too blind to notice." The silence that followed was deafening. Ramesh could practically hear Vikram's mind working, processing the weight of his words. But he knew it wasn't going to be easy. For the last few years, Meera had been filling his son's head with doubts about his father, making it impossible for Ramesh to break through. It was as if there was an invisible wall between them now, one that had only been growing taller and thicker with each passing day. "You don't know what you're talking about," Vikram finally said, his voice rising in defense. "Meera is just trying to help us. She's trying to make sure we don't lose everything we've worked for." "What do you want me to do? Just let everything fall apart?" "She's been a great partner, Dad. I'm doing this for our family." Ramesh felt a bitter laugh bubble up in his throat, but he swallowed it down. He had heard this all before, the justifications, the promises, the false righteousness. "Helping? Is that what you think this is?" Ramesh's voice dropped, becoming quiet but no less firm. "Meera's help comes at a cost, Vikram. A cost that she's willing to pay. But you're willing to throw your own father under the bus for her? For what? To build a future on lies." He paused, giving his son a moment to process. Ramesh knew the conversation wasn't going to be easy, but he couldn't back down now. Not when it mattered the most. He had to make Vikram see the reality of what was happening. "She's been plotting against me, Vikram," Ramesh continued, his voice softer now, but the emotion in his words was impossible to ignore. "She's been poisoning your mind, making you think that I'm the problem. But the problem is not me. It's what she's become." Vikram's breath hitched on the other end of the line. For a moment, Ramesh thought he might actually say something meaningful, something that could bridge the gap that had opened between them. But the moment passed quickly, and Vikram's response was defensive once again. "Dad, I don't need you to tell me what's going on in my life. I'm an adult. I've got a wife, a business, responsibilities." Vikram shot back, his voice tight. "And right now, I don't need this fight. I don't need you stirring things up when everything is already falling apart." Ramesh gritted his teeth, resisting the urge to yell. He had to remain calm. He had to keep pushing forward, even if it felt like he was losing his grip on everything he held dear. "You've already made your choice, haven't you?" Ramesh said quietly, a mixture of sadness and regret in his voice. You've chosen her over your own father. And that's your right. But don't think for a second that this doesn't have consequences." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Ramesh could feel the weight of his words pressing down on his son. The truth had been laid bare, but it was too much for Vikram to handle in one go. "Look, I can't talk about this right now," Vikram finally said, his voice colder. "We'll talk later." The line went dead. Ramesh stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in his hand. He had said what needed to be said. Now, it was up to Vikram to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. But Ramesh wasn't holding his breath. The next morning, the sun was a pale sliver in the sky, casting a muted light over the empty streets below. Ramesh had barely slept. His mind raced through the events of the past day, the confrontation with Vikram, the coldness in his voice, and the painful realization that his son had drifted further away from him than he had ever feared. It wasn't just the conspiracy Mira had set into motion. It was the fact that, somewhere along the way, his bond with his son had frayed beyond repair. But Ramesh couldn't dwell on that now. He had other matters to attend to. His feet shuffled across the wooden floor, the sound of each step echoing in the stillness of the house. It had been a week since he had found out about Mira's plot to seize control of the family assets, and in that time, his resolve had only grown stronger. He glanced at the old family photo album on the coffee table. The yellowing pages chronicled the good times, the moments of happiness that now seemed like they belonged to a different life. His wife, Neelam, had kept the album meticulously, adding each new milestone as their family grew. There were pictures of Vikram as a young boy, full of promise, laughter, and innocence. But now, all Ramesh had were memories that seemed to be slipping through his fingers like sand. Sighing, Ramesh turned away from the photo album and made his way to the kitchen. He needed a cup of coffee, something to clear the fog in his mind. As the steam rose from the mug, his thoughts returned to his conversation with Vikram. There was a coldness in his son that Ramesh couldn't understand. It was as if the boy he had raised with love and devotion had disappeared, replaced by someone who only saw the world through a lens of ambition and convenience. Ramesh's eyes narrowed as he thought about the next steps. Mira's conspiracy wasn't just about power, it was about control. She wanted to isolate Ramesh, make him appear irrelevant, and in the process, she had also driven a wedge between him and his son. But Ramesh wasn't going to let her succeed. The thought of her manipulating his family, turning them against him, made his blood boil. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost time. He had a meeting scheduled with his lawyer to discuss the next course of action, the disinheritance. It wasn't just a legal move, it was a declaration of his strength. Mira thought she could walk all over him, but he would show her that he wasn't some frail old man waiting to be pushed aside. He had fought too hard for his family, for his legacy, to let her tear it all down. The doorbell rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. Ramesh's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting anyone, but he knew who it was. He opened the door, and there stood his lawyer, Samuel Green, looking every bit the professional he was. Samuel had been his confidant for years, helping him navigate the complexities of his estate. But today, the stakes were higher than ever. "Mr. Harvey," Samuel greeted him with a nod, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I trust you're ready for today." Ramesh didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed the door behind them, his mind still reeling from the confrontation with Vikram. But he quickly pushed aside those thoughts. This was business, not family. This was about protecting what was his, and no amount of guilt or sadness was going to stop him. "I'm ready," Ramesh finally said, his voice firm. "Let's get this over with." Samuel led him to the small office at the back of the house, a space that had once been shared with Neelam for years. It was now just Ramesh, sitting at the desk, surrounded by legal papers and contracts. The room felt colder without her presence, but Ramesh had grown accustomed to the emptiness. Samuel took a seat across from him, pulling out the necessary documents. "As we discussed, we'll need 2 non-family witnesses to sign the disinheritance clause," Samuel explained, his voice calm and reassuring. "It's a straightforward process, but it will stand up in court if challenged." Ramesh nodded, his eyes scanning the papers in front of him. "I want everything in my power to ensure that Mira doesn't get a single penny of this estate," he said, his voice low and determined. "This isn't just about money. It's about making sure my family knows what she's done." Samuel placed the pen in front of him, his gaze steady. "This is your decision, Mr. Harvey. I will draft the final version of the will and have it ready for signatures by tomorrow." Ramesh took the pen, the cold metal feeling heavier in his hand than he had imagined. He hovered over the signature line for a moment, considering the finality of his actions. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only one that made sense. Mira had crossed a line, and now she would pay the price for it. He signed. As soon as the ink hit the paper, something in Ramesh shifted. It wasn't relief, or even satisfaction. It was a sense of clarity. He had made the choice, and now there was no turning back. The deed was done, and the consequences would follow.